Welcome, 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 West Point Thoroughbreds family. This is the latest edition of our Condition Book podcast, learning the nuances, the ins and outs of planning horses' campaigns and the frustrations that come along with it. Joined as always by West Point Chief Operating Officer Aaron Birkenauer and West Point Executive Vice President Tom Bellhouse. Hey guys,
Hey, Joe.
always good to see you. And this has been a
And Joe.
great experience, I think, for me and for the West Point partners to learn more, a little bit peek behind the curtain about trying to plot out courses for our horses. We're going to do a little bit of a demo in this episode to basically kind of give you guys just the scoop on how to check on these things for yourselves, like the condition books, the virtual stable. We'll touch on overnights. We'll touch on stake schedules. Erin's going to share her screen and show you all the things that you should bookmark so you can have an idea, maybe even before we have an idea of which horses are going to run where throughout the season. So I'll toss it to Erin and she can share her screen and talk about how to find first and foremost, how to find the condition books and the index on Equibase.
Yeah, so the two, when you're entering horses and running in races like we are, several hundred times a year, the Equibase condition books and the Equibase overnights are going to be your favorite pages. A quick Google search, you can go on Equibase and find the condition books, or Equibase overnights are the two that you're going to want to bookmark. So at any given time, every track that is currently running will publish their condition book online with the date range. Some will be out way in advance, like, Keeneland, I think they try to get that out, earlier in the year. We're still a month away from the start of the meet, and that is on there. Where other times of the year, the condition books, you'll be anxiously waiting. Like, you'll have a horse who's ready to go, and you're like, we want the maiden race going short on the dirt, and you're just clicking and refresh. Tom will talk about the concept of refresh, refresh, refresh. But sometimes you're biting your nails waiting for these books to come out so you can have an idea of where you run. So one of the key features that you'll probably use is the index. So let's use Gulfstream as an example. This is going to be your rundown of all the races from March 6th through March 31st. So the last couple weeks of the championship meet. So I imagine there'll be one more condition book. What day is the Florida Derby, Tom?
It is the 30th.
Yep. So this is the last condition book of the championship meet. I could have figured that out easily. You see 3-year-olds, grade 1 stakes, March 30th. That is your Florida Derby. So, it takes some time to learn how to read what all the symbolism in here. But what you can do is you can match it up against the actual condition book. So you see there's two links. There's the index, and then there's the actual condition book. And I am a really big fan of using Control F. So I want to go to March 30th. And you have to kind of go through this. This is just reminding the horsemen of the nominations, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So here I can get to March 30th and see all of the races that are going to be carded that day. And I see there is a grade 1 stakes. Where is it? There it is. 4 3-year-olds going long. In your index, your races are broken out into short and long. Short is anything 7.5 furlongs or below. And then long is a mile or longer. So this is not broken down into 1-turn versus 2-turn races. So sometimes you'll come in here and you'll see a race on March 16th. Let's do maiden special weight for 3-year-olds. You see there's a maiden race going long on March 16th. You have to come back in here and cross-reference to know if that is a flat mile. Oh, I went too far. If that is a flat mile or, yep, it is. But this could also be a mile and a 16th, a mile and an 1/8. It could be 2 turns. Also on this condition book page, you see another important thing where when entries are taken. And that'll be a good segue here in a minute when I toss it over to Tom to talk about the overnight. So we know that this maiden race for 3-year-olds on March 16th, Gulfstream has adopted the new week out entry policy, which has positives and negatives, but it is kind of nice to know a week in advance that you're running for multiple reasons. Travel, if the race doesn't go, you have the ability to pivot, etc. So the 3-year-old races are pretty easy. Starter allowances, you can reference back into some of our previous posts. in which we talk about that. You have your maiden claiming races, your Florida bred races. This time of year, you will see quite a few straight 3-year-old races, and then you get in, as the year progresses, you'll have more 3 and up, and then you have 4 and up races for boys. So usually the first page of your condition book is going to be for all male races. And then you scroll down here, and a lot of this will be the same. A lot of the conditions will be written the same, but you will have them for females. So the stake for the girls, the 3-year-old fillies is on March 30th as well. The T next to this March 30th, it means turf. And then you see the little A, that is the synthetic track. So you really, it does help to have the 2 tabs open. So if you see something that is of interest to you in the index, you can come back in here and really get into the nitty gritty. One thing that we talked about in a previous podcast to note, especially with Gulfstream, is let's use this maiden race right here. The purse is 89,000, but if you are not Florida bred, you're going to subtract 14, and then you're going to subtract 5 from there. So you're going to subtract 19,000, and that's going to be your purse. So you kind of have to read. Some other tracks are different. Like in New York, everybody runs for the same purse. If you're New York bred, you run for more. And then you can see there's some kind of fine print in here about the weights. And if you look, turn it over to you in just a second, Tom, but with the stakes races, you can read, how the purse is distributed, when the nominations close, how they decide, say they get 15 horses in the Florida Derby, how they decide who gets to run. Let's see, what else? Nominations, we'll talk about that at the end of this, but you see it's a free nomination. If you forget to do it, it's $300 when you decide to enter, etc. So there is a lot of fine print in here, but the moral of the story is between those 2 pages, the index and the actual condition book, there is a lot of information. And the more you look at the different tracks and how their races are written, you'll learn how to decipher this and kind of figure out the thought process with race selection. So let's go back to, let's look at the condition book for Gulfstream, and this will be a good segue to turn it over to Tom. So let's see, yesterday was the 25th, so they entered for the 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at March 3rd. Back here. All right. So Tom, we're going to have a hypothetical horse. Tommy B is pointing for.
Why don't we go with our girl Sedona?
Yeah, perfect. Well, that was an extra race, but yeah. So you have a horse who's pointing for a race on March 3rd. You are anxiously awaiting the entries on Sunday, February 25th. So what happens? This race.
So she was entering on Saturday originally, right?
She entered for the race on Saturday. The race didn't go, was brought back as an extra.
So this is a perfect example.
Yep. So I'm going to show Saturday's overnight. So that was the condition book and the index. These are the overnights. This is kind of a subsection of the condition book. So Saturday's overnight, they already drew, is March 2nd. Sedona was originally pointing for a maiden race on this day at the Big Fountain of Youth card. The race did not go. But if you look down here, excuse me, for maiden fillies 3-year-olds, 7 furlongs, extra 4. So what happens now, Tom?
So this is a perfect example. We're looking to run on Fountain of Youth Day in the big time filly maiden race. And lo and behold, the way that everything shook out with the card, and it is one of the best, probably the best card of the year, one of the best cards you're ever going to see in South Florida. 14 races on Saturday, a ton of stakes races. I mean, the quality is just spectacular. Unfortunately for us, they didn't really use that particular maiden race. They used a couple of other maiden races, and everything else was mostly just allowance races and obviously the stakes start. I think there's 7 or 8 stakes that day. So lo and behold, we don't get in. But on the bottom of that overnight, they list us as an extra of that was basically they might have had enough horses to run that race, but they just said that in their mind it would be a better card to use this on Sunday as opposed to Saturday. So
And I
now
think
we fast forward.
they write a lot of the 3-year-old filly. They write a lot of the maiden races for fillies on Sundays historically.
Correct. So the fact that they didn't use it was a bummer. Obviously, we would have loved to have run on Fountain of Youth Day, but luckily for us, they brought it back the very next day, and lo and behold, we have we're in a great field. I went and looked at the PPs. I mean, it is a dicey group, as you would expect at the champions meet, right at the end of the champions meet. And for those of you who like to wager, I believe usually that is the last day that they have the Rainbow Six. So she's going to be part of the Rainbow Six last day. So it's always a big payout. But these overnights, as we get into overnights, Aaron, first of all, the phrase overnight comes from back in the day. You wouldn't know the entries for the next day. They used to draw a day out and then run the races. So maybe 2 days out tops. So when you'd walk in the back gate to the track, and they're still there once in a while now, when you come in, like in Saratoga, there's a little mailbox right inside the gate, and it holds the overnights. And what people would do is they'd come in to the gate in the morning, they'd get the overnight, and they would know who's running in their races against them. We've made obviously very significant strides since then, but keep in mind we were probably running 6 days a week back then, so things have changed. When I first started with West Point, Terry, myself, we lobbied hard with the Horsemen's liaison, a guy named Bruce Johnston, who was a wonderful man who actually trained for West Point. Bruce has passed, but he was just a wonderful liaison between the horsemen and NYRA. And we really lobbied hard because it used to be you wouldn't know for horses racing on Sunday, the overnight wouldn't come out till Friday at 4 or 5 o'clock. And it was almost impossible to make plans. Like we had all these partners, and granted, partnerships were still fairly new at the time, but we had partners calling hey, I'm trying to decide, do I go to the Hamptons for the weekend, go up to Vermont for the weekend, or is my horse going to run? And we literally, where the joke refresh comes from is they usually, some tracks are great. Like Kentucky, they draw early in the day and stuff. Well, New York is notorious, Gulfstream too, but New York is notorious for, Wednesday night, we're drawing on Wednesday for Saturday, and Thursday for Sunday. It's 3 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock. You're waiting to, refresh. James Perry, I can hear him now. We've been waiting to see who's in the stake with us, and you're refreshing, just hoping to get those entries. But it's really a very powerful tool to use Equibase. And where this is all found is under the Horseman's tab. So if you go under the Horseman's tab, you'll see the condition book. You'll see the overnights. You'll also see stakes books and stakes noms. So it's a really, other than the West Point website and chatter, I would say using Equibase as a great tool to follow your horses and look at, we get it out as soon as we get the entries come out. We'll hit it with an entry alert. But in the short term, we're always checking Equibase, Aaron.
Yep. Well, and then one other tool, we're going to get into stakes nominations in a few minutes, but one other tool that you can use on Equibase when you do buy into a horse and you want to get alerted when a horse is working out or when a horse is entered beyond just the alerts that you get for West Point, is the virtual stable. Aaron, can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so any horse that has a registered name with the Jockey Club, I think you can also do it for unnamed horses too. I need to check on that. You can do it by the mare, but for the sake of demonstration, you can add any horse that you want in here. You can add every horse in the West Point stable or just your horses, and you can set some preferences on how you want to be alerted. Let's see, manage your stable, view my settings. So what I like to do is I like to be notified when they work out. You can do trainers on here too. I haven't updated these in a long time, but you get updated when they're worked out, when they work out, when they're entered in a race, the result of that race. And I like the 2 hour notification on the day of the race. It's called the race day notification that comes into your email. There are not text message updates available as of right now, but this is all done through email. But it's super handy. Say, you know, and you can also use it from a wagering standpoint. Say you're at the track and you see a horse who ran a really good second, and you're like, you know, I want to bet that horse next time. You can pop them into your virtual stable, and you will be alerted when they are running again. So it's a really neat tool. It is free, again, found on Equibase. And it just, you know, very quickly, once the overnights are posted, you will get an email in your inbox if a horse is entered. So that's super handy. Like Tom said, we try to get notice out to our partners with any additional information as soon as possible, but this is the source if you want to be the first to know.
Absolutely. And, you know, you definitely want to be the first to know when your horse is entered in a stakes race, but there's a process that goes along before that, before we actually enter in a stake. And it's called the stakes nominations process. Aaron showed us really quick before. And, you know, it happens a long time, not a long time, but several weeks usually before the actual entries for the race go. Aaron, can you go through that with us? You know, what does it cost to nominate a horse? Does it cost anything? Can you nominate to multiple stakes at the same time? Just take us through, you know, the planning process when the stakes nominations are due.
I think Cugino, a horse that we have actually entered in the Colonel Liam this weekend, is a good example. You know, trainers like keeping their options open, especially when it's a free nomination. So if you think that there's any chance you might run in a certain spot, if it fits your horse, there's really no downside to nominating. I think in this case, we were pointing for an allowance race on March 9th. You know, that allowance race is not going to be head and shoulders different than the stake. The stake has a better purse. There's better timing to some of the bigger races at Keeneland, you know, and it gives trainers the ability to call audibles. You know, something else is you may be nominated to a stake and you get a call from the racing office that's like, hey, we've only got 5 in here. You might want to take a shot. So you'll see some stakes races that look like they have all these horses nominated. And you're like, how are we ever going to get in? But usually it works out because everybody's kind of playing the chessboard, and they may ship, they may run in the allowance race, the horse gets sick, the horse gets hurt, etc. So it's really just a way, you know, and sometimes the nominations are not very long and you can really study and get a sense of who's going to run. Like if we look at Santa Anita, we have Scatify running this weekend. It's not on there. Oh, here it is, the San Felipe. I bet you there's not a ton. See, there's only 15 noms. So you can get a pretty good sense, you know, because of the horse population in California, of who you're going to run against in here. And you kind of already know anyway. But if you come on here and they're, you know, a horse that you're expecting to be the big favorite's not on here, then you're kind of like, whoa, are they hurt? Are they sick? What happened? So it just gives the horseman the ability to kind of handicap. The jockeys agents are looking at this and trying to figure out, you know, I have a really nice horse for the stake at Oaklawn, but I also have 5 to ride at Gulfstream that day. You know, it's everybody is playing the chessboard and trying to find the best spot for their horse, the best spot for their jockey. You know, some races will come with a hefty nomination fee, and those are things that you have to weigh. You know, a lot of the grade 1s, they just don't want anybody and everybody nominating. So you will have to pay usually a couple thousand. The Triple Crown races, you have to nominate way in advance for those. You probably saw at the end of January, the Triple Crown nominations came out. There are a ton of horses nominated. Some of them are unraced at this point because you just never know how your horse is going to develop. But again, it comes back to you want to keep your options open. Most of these stakes that you will see on the Equibase stakes nominations will close a couple weeks out before the race. It gives the horseman the ability to start planning. The nice thing about stakes, and we talked about this on another podcast, is we use Twilight Eclipse as an example, especially with your older horses. It really, you know, we knew Twilight's campaign from January 1st through the end of the year. Like we pretty much knew plus or minus a little bit here and there where he was going to run. With the 3-year-olds, we were talking about this before we got on, there are a ton of straight 3-year-old stakes races, especially over the summer. You know, once Colonial opens up, you have Saratoga, Kentucky Downs. So there will be tons of horses nominated everywhere and all these different options. So it's really, it can be difficult for the trainers to stay on top of that, to be nominated anywhere. We often use the phrase anywhere and everywhere, just so when it does come time to enter, you are nominated to the race and able to enter. There are some times where if you forget to nominate, it's a big problem. But most of the time they will let you supplement for a couple $100. And that just means you didn't nominate for whatever reason, but the day of entry, you are allowed to still enter the race. If you forget to nominate your horse to the Triple Crown, it's going to be a hefty fee that you're going to have to pay if you're not Triple Crown nominated. And you will hear of that. Like there are horses that have won big races and the connections had to decide, is it worth coughing up whatever it is, 50,000 maybe to run in the Derby. So it is a lot of administrative things that you have to stay on top of. But again, at the end of the day, it's just nice to have options. And sometimes we'll have horses where partners are like, oh, I see they're nominated the stake, and the trainer has no intention of running, but it's just to cover the bases.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to lose in a lot of these cases.
Exactly.
But, you can nominate to as many stakes races as you want. You can enter different stakes races and cross enter, as they say, and try to figure out which is the best spot for you. But Tom, that's not the case with other races, correct? Like you can't enter 3 different allowances and choose which one works best for you.
Yeah, each track has their own set of rules, each jurisdiction, and I know that's something we're looking to get more mainstream across the country to have similar rules. But if you enter a race, and in New York, it's been kind of difficult. It's something we're trying to address right now. If you're entered in a race and you come back and enter another race, especially in wintertime, you see it where Linda Rice is probably the leading trainer, and she also is not at all afraid to scratch out of spots where she doesn't feel that horse is going to be competitive or is not going to run 1-2. You'll see horses, an example, a horse that used to be an old West Point horse, Divine Armor, this week. Divine Armor was in with David Jacobson to run, scratched, and then he ran back yesterday, ran a bang up second. So if you're in the same jurisdiction, they'll usually let you scratch as long as you're entering back. Or if you're in as an MTO and then all of a sudden you enter another race, they basically scratch you from the MTO. That's something that we're trying to wrestle with, because that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But you're not allowed to, let's say, enter a race, an allowance race in New York, and then just go and enter another one at Monmouth and just scratch out in New York to go to Monmouth. Once you enter a race, unless it's a stake, because sometimes they'll let you can scratch out of an allowance race to go to a stake, but you can't just scratch out of a race in New York just to say, I want to go run somewhere else. They'll put you in what's called jail. It's horse racing jail. And that's one of the examples of, if all of a sudden you scratch out of the allowance race and you want to run at Pimlico, whatever the set time you're in jail, you can't run in Pimlico until jail's over. If that makes sense.
I think it protects the handicappers too, because otherwise you're going to have all these scratch downfield and have no idea who's running. So I think that's a good thing for the horse players as well. But there's actually a pretty good example of this coming up this week. We've cross-entered Giant Game in a race on Friday at Tampa, an allowance race on Friday, and then also the Canadian Turf on Saturday at Gulfstream. So Aaron, can you just drill down on that? Why are we allowed to enter both? And, would it be the same case if they were just both allowance races?
If they were both allowance races, no, I don't believe you could do that. You couldn't cross enter, but the way it fell, I believe the race at Tampa actually is before the stake at Gulfstream, but because Gulfstream enters a week out, we knew we were entered in the Canadian Turf before they even took entries for the allowance race. So when there's a stake involved, you usually have more leeway. And that is very nice, because now, we're going to talk to Dale tomorrow, and kind of map out what we're going to do, but it gives you the ability to handicap. It gives you the ability to look at the weather. there's not going to be a ton of difference between Tampa and Gulfstream weather, but there could be. Sometimes you're playing this with a race at Aqueduct and a race at Churchill Downs. Well, there could be a big difference in the weather. And it is nice because it gives you, that ability. And usually you're doing this with really good horses. And like Tom said, unfortunately for us, sometimes you wish you could play the chessboard with maiden races. Oh, my maiden race in New York didn't go. It's brought back, and that's where it can get tricky is let's use the Sedona example. There was a race in New York that entered on Saturday as well. And we were like, we're ready to run. We want to enter New York, and the race goes. And then you look, and the next day the race ended up being used at Gulfstream. Well, that's too bad. You've got to make some decisions that sometimes work in your favor and sometimes it's pie in your face. So that's why the trainers, they often have good relationships with the racing office, and they can call up there and say, hey, how many do you have for that maiden race for 3-year-old fillies? Like, I don't really want to go out of town, but I need you to give me your word that you're going to use it. And they may say, yeah, I'm going to use it, but I'm not going to get to it till next week. And then the trainer's like, okay, well, I'm ready to run. Do I go out of town or do I wait till next week? You get the gist that you're always trying to kind of figure this out.
And this is where your trainers and assistant trainers are very much in line with the racing office as well as the jocks agents. The jocks agents kind of play a big role. Your really good jocks agents are intertwined with your top trainers. And I see it firsthand with the Clement stable. Like, if all of a sudden we're in this type situation and I'm sitting there, they'll have called Ron Anderson. They'll have called Steve Rushing. Ron Anderson handles Rosario and Johnny V. Steve Rushing handles the Ortiz brothers. Those two calls basically cover 4 of the top jocks on the circuit. So you get a sense. Kieran McLaughlin with Luis Saez. I mean, you don't have to go that far in to get a sense of, are you guys booked on horses in those races? Because that'll give you an idea if the race is going to go too. Is if the jocks are already booked for those races.
Yeah.
I think another thing that you're talking about is, going back to Giant Game, is Dale really wanted to run him in an allowance race at Gulfstream. And we've gone into this in depth in other series, other episodes rather. He's a 3 other than. A 3 other than allowance is a high level race. Dale really wants to try him on the turf, wanted to walk him out of his stall to the paddock at Gulfstream. But one of the issues with trying to get that to go is there are so many turf stakes at Gulfstream this time of year for older horses that the term we use is they're up against. So you could say that this allowance race we were trying to get to go is up against the Canadian turf. For a certain horse, it could be up against the McDermott. There's just a lot of different stakes races for people to go to with more money, but it's also going to be tougher competition. We were really hoping to get a little easier spot, still a high level race, but easier than a stake to go. And they couldn't fill the race. It kept being brought back on the overnight. We kept crossing our fingers, crossing our toes. It didn't go. So now the situation is, do we run in the Canadian turf, or they were able to get that race, the easier race, to go at Tampa, but you're running for a quarter of the money. So those are the decision points that you're faced with. And I'll be interested to see which way Dale is leaning. You get the easier spot at Tampa, but you have to ship. You go from your stall to the paddock at Gulfstream for way more money, but inherently it's a graded stake at the Gulfstream Championship meet. It's going to be very tough.
On that note, what happens if we scratch out of the Canadian turf, Tom? Like, is there an entry fee that we lose? Can you explain how that process works?
Yeah, it just depends. It just depends on the track. Sometimes they'll ask you to enter, and Aaron deals with like Dale and people like that all the time, where the racing office will say enter, and if you scratch, we won't penalize you. But usually in theory, yes.
$100 entry fee, and a lot of times they're willing to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to help them on a race, and it ends up being, they might have said, hey, there's going to be a 6-horse field, can you enter? And then the entries come out and there's 11 horses. Like, and that's not as unusual as it sounds. Like, you'll be in the office with the trainer at 1 o'clock and they're saying, yeah, we only have 6 for that race. And they're hustling everybody and their brother to get in the race,
Yeah.
and then lo and behold, it works out. But I would say in most cases, if you're going to cross enter, you just expect to pay those fees. But if you're helping out the racing office and they have a similar type relationship with you and you've helped them out, then sometimes that kind of stuff gets waived.
So it's $1,500 to enter. So there's a bunch of different scenarios that could cause you not to run, and I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule, but at the end of the day, I think especially with stakes races, the racing office and the trainers, they've got to work together.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of that between the racing office and the trainer and the jock's agent. A lot of stuff that we don't see just as a handicapper, or just as watching the races, that determines, which horses run in which races fill, etc. One other tool that we wanted to show you, and this is a little bit more in the weeds than the condition book and the virtual stable, which is easily accessible, is called trainer data. This is something that we use to plot courses for horses, something that a lot of trainers use, as would be evident by the name, trainer data. So it's a little bit, it's very complex sometimes if you don't know how to look at it, but it gives you a lot of context for the kind of races that have been run at track in the past, what kind of figures it takes to win those races. Aaron, can you just give us like a brief overview of the way that we use trainer data to properly spot our horses?
Yeah, so I think it's nice because you can go back and very easily look and be like, let's use a Canadian turf for an example. Let's look at any turf stakes that were run at Gulfstream last year. So we're going to do 2023 Gulfstream 3 and up, 4 and up, males open. That was a lot of clicking, but those are the filters that I want to use. I want to look at all the stakes races. So and then you can sort by purse. I want to do turf routes. So that's very handy. You can come up and then you can see all the turf stakes that they ran at the meet. Championship meet, or not, it looks like most of these were at the championship meet, and you can click in. You can see this was the Pegasus turf last year. You can see the field size. You can see if any horses got excluded. Sometimes we'll look at that. We'll be like, well, how many did they have in there last year? Let's help us kind of figure out if this is a race that's going to overfill. They have their own set of speed figures, kind of with most speed figures, like Ragozin or Thorograph, the lower the number, the better. And you can even do this, too. We could look up, you could say, what number does it take to win a dirt sprint maiden special weight for 3-year-olds at Oaklawn this year? Oaklawn, that's Monmouth. Oaklawn 2024. So I have a 3-year-old maiden, and I just want to see how tough these races are really coming up. Very easily with the click, you can see, let's look at Excitable Boy, and you can tell a lot about these races and how they're shaping up. So it's a neat tool that, I think Tom and I have really embraced. And when we're having discussions about placement and where to run horses, it's really, really nice to be able to pull up past races. And then you can also look up any horse. Scatify, he's running this weekend. You can pull up any horse, see their workout history. We can also go to, let's see, where are PPs, stakes nominations. We're going to go to the Gotham. And then this kind of ranks all of the nominees by their speed figure. They call it the base PSR. We have Slider and Scatify. They've both run. You see there's a lot of horses in this 8, 9, 10 range. Timberlake just ran, so he won't be running. And you can go through and look at the speed figure ratings and then all of the past performances of the horses in those races. If this is something you're interested in, we can set you up with a trial for trainer data, and then you can speak with them about, it's a subscription service, but it is very handy. I think even if you're a horse player, it is very it would be very beneficial. The one thing they're not on here are sales results and video. So you'd have to use a different service for that. But if you like data and being able to click very quickly and have things at your fingertips, it's excellent.
I mean, like you said, like, trainers get to handicap these races way ahead of time. Like, handicappers in general have to wait until the PPs come out. Trainers get to use trainer data to check out who's pointing to a race, like the par figure for what would win that race, who's pointing to it, their past performances. I know a handicapper that uses it, Tom Bellhouse. Can you tell, is there anything else that Aaron didn't touch on that, you find useful about trainer data?
I think that the neatest part is when you look at those, and there's lots of different things to do. If you go to just entries, for instance, we can go to maybe Tampa. We run QF 75 on Wednesday, just under entries.
There we go. Sorry.
That's okay.
This isn't a feature I use a ton because I'm not as good of a horse player as Tom.
Okay. TP, yeah, Tampa on Wednesday to the right there.
Okay.
Perfect. And we go right to the last race. Click on, there we go. And then I'd say
we're the favorite.
Yeah, view PDF report for the race to the right. There we go. So this is the race that we're running QF in. On trainer data, and there's certain things that don't get taken into consideration. Sometimes grass and distance and things like that don't necessarily get taken into to consideration. But they put a power number, and if you scroll down, Aaron, to QF, you can see his pattern of his history of his career. Obviously, lots and starts and stops, like we've discussed in the past. But we also know that QF seems to run well fresh. So hopefully, this freshening that we've given him in the last couple months will be sitting on a big effort, and he's also getting a class relief. So with his running style, I would think that he's going to be fairly forwardly placed, and we're gonna be sitting in a great spot. I mean, if he can come back to those 7 or 8s on his form, he'll be very hard to be in that particular spot.
Yep. Yeah. We're all. Yeah. He's a barn favorite, I think, as well. So we're all rooting for him. Go ahead, Aaron.
I think 2 other quick things on trainer data are, let's look at QF 75. If you are a pedigree guru, you can very easily click on this mare and look at her progeny and what they've done.
Turns out he's the best.
Yep, he is. You can view her everything. Most everything is clickable, which is nice if you want to know the dam's race record. So she broke her maiden on the turf, then won on synthetic. If you're involved in our broodmare ventures, this is something I really like to look at during breeding season. If you let's see, so broodmare sire, Indian Charlie. What? I can view his progeny that have run since 1992 and their lifetime earnings. And what do you know? Flightline is at the top. And when you're doing matings, you can kind of go through and see if there are any trends here. So, to me, just looking at this, you've got in the top, whatever this is, 10, 12 horses for Indian Charlie, the broodmare, he's the broodmare sire for 2 horses by Tapit. So that's something, if you really wanted to get into pedigrees and digging through breeding, that is pretty cool too. And again, you can come in here, you can, click around, you can click on the trainer. It looks like John's having a good couple weeks. And yeah, I mean, it's really the world is your oyster if you're a horse racing data lover.
And one other thing that I like to do with this, I like to look at this at the sale. When we're at the sales in Ocala, all of a sudden we'll be looking, and you can get a ton of information from a pedigree page, without a doubt. But all of a sudden you can dive a little deeper in to the dam or, whoever, and looked at, oh, wait a minute, all of her prodigy have done well on the grass, not on the dirt. Or why don't you pull up Carson, if you would, Aaron, because he's kind of an interesting horse. He was out of a Henny Hughes mare, Hot and Hectic. So Carson is her only prodigy to make to the races. And she was a horse that started her career with Kenny McPeek and the Kentucky circuit, kind of bounced around, broke her maiden, I believe, was that Belterra?
Yeah, he's way better than she was.
Yeah.
Already.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's one of those, oh, wait, what did she do on this surface or that surface? And, being a son of Cupid, he was a son of Tappan. So it's really fascinating, the whole family dynamic. And, we like to look up all of a sudden, if you think a horse is going to be a grass or a synthetic horse, well, let's look at what the other prodigy have done and where they've had success. Or if you think the horse is going to be a two-turn horse, yet all of the mare's prodigy are sprinters, it's something to keep in mind when you're looking. And you can't really totally see that off the catalog page.
Yeah. So one last thing that I think that's great, Tom, and I use it too at the sales too. It really lets you dive deeper into a pedigree. You have the catalog. I know a lot of partners like the Auction Edge. The Auction Edge gives you a lot of this information, but this would let you take it a step further. Nobody really loves to talk about it, but when we're faced with decisions about whether or not to run a horse for a claiming tag, we can pull this up and it's just one more, data point. We can see, let's see how many horses were claimed for 50 or more at Oaklawn in the last 45 days. So this gives you the rundown of, it looks like there's quite a bit of claiming activity there. And if you really wanted to dive in to, are these 3-year-olds, are they older horses? What's the distance? You could do that. Sometimes you'll run a horse for a tag and you'll look on here and there's really been no claiming activity at that level. And then you feel a little bit better about maybe, being aggressive and taking a swing. Or you look here and you're like, wow, there's lots of claiming activity. So this is something that we do use when making those decisions. We're kind of looking at those sort of trends.
Yeah. I mean, it's so thorough. It's unbelievable the amount of data that you can get from this. And yeah, I mean, just it's great to, I think it's great for the partners to know like all of the forethought that goes into these decisions. And I think that that's what's been valuable about this series. And yeah, I mean, go to Equibase, fill your virtual stable, get familiar with the overnights and the condition books. And then, yeah, like like Aaron said, like if you want to browse around trainer data, we can get you set up with a trial there. So thank you to Aaron and Tom, as always, for their insights. Thank you to the partners for watching. If you have any comments or any horses you want to see us talk about, drop them in the comments below. We always read them, and we're always happy to jump on and talk about our favorite thing in the world, horses, and plotting out races for them. Cheers, guys.
If you have any questions, go ahead and post them on Chatter. I mean, this is something Tom and I really enjoy talking about, so we're happy, if you want to look at some of the races that you see in the condition book and why certain horses are eligible or might not be eligible, we're happy to walk you through.
And Joe, what's the most dangerous thing in horse racing?
An owner with a condition book.
That's right.
With that.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Hey, guys.